So welcome everyone. Today is our Tech Tuesday. Tech Tuesday is a program of the Innovation Center, the MCA Innovation Center. And the Innovation Center seeks to drive economic growth in the region by supporting tech innovation and entrepreneurship to develop an ecosystem of companies that will create high-wage jobs, opportunities for talent in the region, and just strengthen the overall tech ecosystem. So this year, we've been focusing our monthly Tech Tuesdays on pathways to innovation, fueling innovation. Alberto reminded me just a little bit ago that this is basically the culmination or capstone of a year of programming. Because the last three fueling innovations that we are planning have a little bit of a different structure. And Alberto will go into that at the end of the program so that you can mark your calendars for that. But this is the last of our fireside chats. And if you've missed any of the previous ones, you can go to our YouTube channel and log in and see them. I think all but one is recorded. So we are really, really lucky this month to have two phenomenal leaders from our community. Emma Schwartz, who is president of the Medical Center of the Americas Foundation, and Leslie Wingo, who's CEO of Sanders Wingo. And I am going to now turn it over to Alberto, and he will tell you a little bit about their bios and their backgrounds and serve as the moderator for our fireside chat.
Thank you, Nancy. So to present our speakers today, we have first Leslie Wingo. She's the CEO of Sanders and Wingo team, a Texas-based independent multicultural creative intelligence firm, delivering solutions for companies and their brands. She's an avid speaker, confronting stereotypes, challenging labels, exposing biases, and has the tough conversations around race and gender in the business setting. Leslie is also a great believer in the power of philanthropy and serves time in organizations which resonate with her personally. Emma Schwartz serves as president of the Medical Center of the Americas. To those of you who might not know, the Medical Center of the Americas Foundation is a nonprofit organization that drives the vision of positioning the Paso Norte region as a premier center for health delivery, medical education, and biomedical research for military, border, and Hispanic populations. Emma is highly involved in the community as a leader, serving many roles like the director of West Star Bank in El Paso and the Paso Norte Center of Hope, an anti-human trafficking outreach and victim support organization. So we are very lucky to have both leaders here with us. Thank you so much for joining.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for having us. And Leslie, we're really excited to have you. I know you're visiting us from Austin virtually, but have a big presence in El Paso, and really appreciate your leadership.
I'm excited to be here. Let's get into the thing.
Yeah, thank you. So keeping in touch with the Fueling Innovation series, first of all, as innovation leaders, how would you define innovation? So
I'll let you take it away.
Okay, I'll go first. So innovation's always interesting to me because there's a guy that I follow, and to be honest, his name is Guy Kawasaki. And one of the things that he says is ideas are easy, implementation is hard. So ideas can come from anywhere, right? But I think innovation is that hard work that happens in the implementation phase. And that's where it gets really interesting. What do we have? What don't we have? How do we create? How do we fix? What do we do? How do we make bigger? How do we make smaller? Where do we start? Where do we end? And that's where I think all of the innovation comes from. And we can see, I think we can see a lot of this with COVID. If COVID has taught us anything, it's to be prepared for change and how people can adapt when they have something one day and then the next day everything suddenly changes. But that's how I define innovation. It's very much how do we figure out how to solve a problem, or how do we start thinking through what a new future could be.
Well, it's pretty hard to build on that, Leslie. That's great. And I love that you come from the advertising and marketing world, which is very different from the technology world that we're coming from on the MCA side. But all of that applies, right? So when I think about innovation, I think about from ideation to commercialization, from bench to bedside, right? And how do you get there? And it's not just about a new product or service, but it's about how do you do it better? How do you do it cheaper? How do you market it better? How are you more effective? How do you impact? How is it scalable? You know, so there's so many opportunities for innovation. And you know, I know we're going to get to a COVID question later, but what I love about this time period that we're living in right now is just the rapid proof of the need for innovation and the adoption of innovation that I think is going to be transformational as we move forward.
Now, bringing it back to leadership, both of you have been in your positions of leadership for quite a while now. What have you learned that as innovation leaders, that what works, what doesn't, as those evangelists of innovation, of entrepreneurship, or of those forward thinking? What have you learned? So, yeah.
Sure. I guess I'll start on this one. You know, as a CEO of a nonprofit, I report to different groups. I report to my board. I report to my staff. I report to my community, right? And so when I think about the different audiences and vendors and many others in the community, and so when I think about innovation in my position, I have to think about those audiences and what they need, what they desire, what they're trying to get out of our relationship. And I think the MCA has been all about innovation. I grew up in El Paso and left a few times because I felt like there wasn't enough innovation to satisfy my personal needs. I wanted to see a community that was thriving and changing and on the cutting edge and moving. And so in my position at the MCA, I have found this to be the most interesting and opportunistic opportunity for me to try to impart this idea and this vision I have for innovation for our community, whether it's an innovative workplace for our staff, whether it's an innovative strategy for my board to adopt, whether it's innovation in how we partner with our different community partners. Right now, we're trying to develop a very complex EDA grant with a whole host of community partners. And it's going to be incredibly challenging to pull this grant together in a short amount of time. But those are the challenges we need to fuel innovation, right? And so how can we as an MCA organization provide fair collaboration opportunities that will lead to an innovative project that we can all benefit from? And so I think, you know, when you have your CEO hat on and you're thinking about innovation, you have to think about who your audiences are and how do you appeal to them.
And you know, like you said, I spend a lot of time talking to audiences and about audiences and stakeholders. Who are the internal stakeholders, external stakeholders? How do we communicate? What's same, what's different? And for me, I think innovation comes down to, from a leadership perspective, I don't have all the good ideas, so I think good ideas can come from anywhere, but they have to ladder back into the people that we're serving and who we're communicating with. I think innovation comes from diverse ideas and diversity of thought, and just, I like to think an agency world, we're just a bunch of misfit toys that have come together in some weird way, but the weirdness of it makes for great innovation because they're ideas, they're just ideas, right? And that's part of the fun. Let's play with some things, let's see what works, let's see what works for the consumer and what works for the stakeholders. And one of the things that I've been doing is digging into this book by Donald Miller called Story Brand. And his philosophy is, you as a business owner or you as a company, as a brand, your story is to make your customers the hero in that story. And so when I look at it through that lens, and then we can create with other people's pretend money, so to speak, I think that's where innovation comes from. That's where we start to shape. And then the last thing I'll say is that not every company has the same opportunity to be innovative. And so, there's like, the Apollo movie, it's like you have two cans and a string. How are we going to get the people back from space? Oh, the astronauts. Oh, we'll figure it out. So there's those kinds of things. Then you have companies that are well-funded, where they have the time and the patience to try new ideas. But at the end of the day, it becomes, for me, how do we make the client the hero of that story? How do we deliver for them? How do we hopefully make it exciting and fun? But, more importantly, how, are we delivering on what we promised? And I think that's where innovation comes from for me, in a way that makes leadership exciting and dynamic. And, there's no playbook for it. So let's just see what happens with it.
Yeah, and do you think that, what do you think would be like the relationship between leading inside your organization and outside? I mean, both of you, your organizations work with community organizations, other leaders. So what would be the difference between leading your team versus leading other stakeholders that have other priorities, other visions and such?
So for me, I'm going back to the story brand model, right? So when I'm working with my team internally, it's like, what can we do together to make this team the hero of the story? I don't need to present at everything. Other people can present. And let's be honest, they really have the good ideas. Or if I have an idea, they make my idea better. But how do we collectively, leading that team or working with that team, how are they the hero in the story? Or how am I guiding them to get to a positive solution? I think the same thing holds true with clients. If we're trying to sell more widgets, if we're trying to figure out what this diversity thing means, what does equity mean, what does belonging mean in community, it's not about me winning, right? It's about making sure I'm creating a strategy or a framework for them to win in those situations as well. And so it always comes back to, how are we going to do this thing? Because people are trusting me and trusting my company with their brand, with their personal asset, the thing that is probably more valuable to them than anything else, their personal brand or the brand that they work for. And so if we can look at it through this hero's journey, I think that just gives us a different perspective and a different place to start.
Awesome.
Well, touching on what Leslie mentioned earlier in terms of diversity of thought, within my organization, I think the opportunity for innovation starts with who we hire, right? And so at the MCA, we have a really diverse team, not only in terms of gender and race and all that, but of thought. I kind of brag on, I think we're one of the quirkiest teams ever. Everyone is so different. We have, people who are, love risk and risk averse and we have all of this. And so it's bringing that quirkiness together that allows us to I guess, have the right ingredients for inspiring innovation. And sometimes that's not easy. That can be a tough formula until you build, I think, enough trust amongst your team to understand that everyone's ideas are going to be valued. That doesn't mean they're not going to be tested, right? I mean, we need to be comfortable enough to throw out our ideas and accept the testing of them. So, I want, and I say this to the staff, shoot this idea up, because I don't want to look like a fool when I go and present this outside of our organization. So let me throw it out there because I trust you guys, and shoot holes in it, and sometimes the room's quiet with my ideas. That's when I have the most concern, right? I'm like, all right, there's very little feedback here, but trying to create that atmosphere of trust, where as a team, we can accept that we're all different and quirky and we have different ideas, and that bringing our viewpoints on those ideas will bring value. And as a group, I'm a huge believer in group think, that together we can build into really great and innovative ideas. I don't get that pleasure in dealing with outside organizations. So I think when you are dealing with organizations outside of your own, it's important, as you said, to understand your audience, understand the culture within that, because there are more risk-averse organizations. Every company has its own culture. So understanding that culture and how you're going to interact what that chemical reaction is going to be is really important. And you can't impose your own culture on another company. That's a recipe for disaster, just going straight in. But I also think that over time, you need to find the organizations that have chemistry with your organization, where you know that you can create together. You don't always get to pick those, but when you do, it's a lot of fun working together. You can build and build and have an exponential effect when you bond with the right companies.
And what going into the your organizational team, how have you find that? What pathway have you found that is the best way to scale your sentiments or vision whenever you have anything new come up? What has worked for you as a pathway for scaling those that vision or sentiment?
I think for me, it's again, making sure you hire the right people, that you give them you come up with the ideas, but I don't like to micromanage. I hire the right people because I believe in them, and you give them the resources and you give them the support. And hopefully that's how these ideas get scaled, because as a leader, you can't do everything. So it's about the right people, the right resources, and the freedom to create.
And, I'm in a creative industry, and this may sound quirky, but it's fine. As human beings, we've been communicating with each other for thousands of years. The thing that changes for us is how we communicate with one another. And we see this through radio and television and film, all of the old school models, so to speak. And now we're shifting into this new world of social media. People don't watch TV anymore, they watch shows. It was amazing that people watched, was it the Emmys or the Grammys? I get them confused. The Grammys, no, the Emmys, yes, on Sunday, the viewership was up. So people are paying attention to something. And so when I look at, how we scale innovation and vision, for me, it's about it's going back to what Emma said, making sure we're hiring the right people who are paying attention for us. And then also, where do we insert, or what makes sense for our consumer, our stakeholders? We are not a group of technologists. We just like to play with technology. And then we want to be able to use our technology, or use the technology that other people create to reach consumers in a very interesting way. And so sometimes that comes in the traditional things, and then sometimes it comes in experiential ways, right? But we don't know what we don't know, and we don't know until we try it. And I think, sometimes we win and sometimes we don't. But when we try to, when we think about scaling and what things look like, the only limit for us is our ability not to imagine. So if we can imagine and create and look at things through the lens of sci-fi, which is my favorite, then I think we have this incredible opportunity just to go back to that diversity of thought and scale from there. Anything is possible at this moment because it hasn't been done yet. So let's keep playing with it and see where we land.
I'm very curious about your decision-making process. How do you decide in what to allocate resources, what risks to take, what visions are the correct ways to move forward? As leaders, one of the key aspects that I think that distinguish leaders is that decision-making process. Can you share us a little bit about that?
So for me, when I look at risk, it's, what is the level of risk I'm willing to take against whatever the problem is? And then also I want to be able to do work that feeds my, somebody once coined my love tank. So if there's a level of risk and it feeds my love tank and it's meeting all of these things that I want to meet, then decisions are easy. When decisions become tough, sometimes it's an informed decision through research and laddering things back through strategy. Sometimes it's getting opinion from people I trust and that I respect, and some of them I love. And then sometimes, I'll just be honest, sometimes you just have to make a decision. It's a gut reaction to whatever is at hand. So I think, I wish I could tell you the formula for decision making for me are these things, but my brain usually works like a geometry problem, but not when it comes to decision making. It's all over the place.
My staff knows I think in spreadsheet. Like I'm a spreadsheet person. I use spreadsheets for everything, especially project planning. And so when we have a new idea or competing ideas or many ideas or budgets or whatever, and we're trying to allocate resources, I'm all about the project plan and thinking through from beginning to end, what are all the steps you need to take to get somewhere? And knowing that that plan will probably change, but at least you've gone in with a good understanding of what you think the process is going to be and what that's going to cost you in terms of human resources, in terms of other financial resources, et cetera. In the end, there's going to be a lot of gut, as you mentioned, along the way in terms of the decision making, but you go in informed. I remember really early in my career, going into a doctor's office to explain to him why he was being non-compliant. I think I was like 20 years old, and he was screaming at me about how I didn't know what I was talking about and this and that. And so from then on, I have this innate desire to make sure I'm incredibly well-researched before I go into something. And once you know that you are well-researched, that you understand the subject matter really well, it allows for your gut to make the proper decision. So that planning, I think, is incredibly important. And then you have to be able to be willing to test. So to work with your teams. And at the MCA, we have some very established programs, but about every 2 years, we decide it's time to grow into a new aspect of life sciences. We've developed enough. So for example, we had our innovation center that supports tech startup companies. After that, we started our medical device association, Bio El Paso Juarez, and that got established. And so now we've just launched last week our medical device product development lab called Devise, which is kind of in between those two, right? So we don't do everything at once. Our established programs are able to kind of identify new potential opportunities for innovation, fund them, kind of give them that seed funding they need. We test them out. We might pivot a little bit, and then hopefully we either have to kill the program or it's able to grow unto itself. So that's how we generally decide how to use our resources at the MCA.
And also, speaking of resources, about time management, which a big deal for any leader. How do you manage the time you spend doing like operations or doing like the mundane task, and that balance it out with innovation thinking, which is planning for the future, thinking ahead, strategic planning, and all that? I mean, there must be some balance needed because both of them are crucial. How do you deal with that balancing act? Emma, would you like to start?
I'd like to get some advice on that. If anyone wants to offer some, I think the word that many leaders don't do well. We might talk a good game, but honestly, you're pretty tired at the end of the day. You're supposed to spend about 1/3 of your time as a CEO thinking strategically, but it's really easy to get wrapped up in the mundane aspects of work. And then the realities of being a mother, of dealing with COVID, right? So COVID threw a new wrench into everything, everything that you have set up as a leader to make your life work, was kind of thrown away during COVID. And you had to redefine that. You had to redefine your internal expectations of yourself, as well as external expectations, what your staff expected of you, what you expected of them. I mean, the world changed with that. But at the same time, it taught us a lot of lessons on how we can be innovative and, use our time differently, maybe use our time more effectively. I think that working from home a couple of days a week for myself and for many people on our staff is now allowing us to have more time for strategic thinking, for quiet time, for research. Now that our kids are back in school, let me put that caveat. And those changes were probably not very acceptable prior to COVID. And this is one of the COVID positives that we're able to, I think, organize our time a little bit better to create the environments we need to be successful leaders.
So I'm like Emma, the balance thing, I can't figure it out. I've tried to set aside time on my calendar. I try to be very intentional about self-care. So all of that to say is that I think it's more of a rhythm for me, because sometimes it's like smooth jazz and sometimes it's just like really bad thrash metal. It's just bad. I can't figure it out. And I've given up trying to figure it out. But I agree that in this moment of significant change where I remember I was on a plane every week to, oh my God, every business trip I had canceled. And in that moment of, there's a lot of bad words in that moment, but oh my, what are we gonna do next? We have to rethink what we're doing to survive COVID. And survive COVID meant two things. One, making sure employees were healthy, because we have a lot of employees that I describe that live in the sandwich generation of they're taking care of little humans and they may be taking care of parents. So we don't want anybody to get sick. But then two, we still have to pay bills. So how are we going to recreate this thing? So we are doing work and we're collaborating, and it's amazing to me how quickly the schools and no one got it perfect, right? So I think everybody was more forgiving and maybe even more self-aware around empathy and being empathetic to what other people were going through. But how quickly people were able to shift their mind from what was to, okay, we're dealing with this thing. And I remember writing business plans and trying to rewrite things, and we could do these things and having ideas put in place, and then something else would happen, right? And so part of the balance, everything gets thrown off kilter when life gets in the way, and life gets in the way all the time. And it's beautifully messy and complicated, and people come into play in really interesting moments and in a beautiful way. And so I share all of that because I think even through all the innovation and trying to balance the human aspect, the empathy aspect of business, that is what is helping us get through whatever this moment we're calling normal is, creating normal, the new normal. I'm not sure what it is, but I can't figure out the balance. So if anybody has ideas, I'm open to hear them.
You know, and moving away from the idea of balance and thinking about how do we stay innovative, you know, during COVID, I read a lot of books. I discovered Audible, and I became voracious Audible reader when I was working out or, you know, whenever I had time. And that opened my eyes to a million thoughts that we were able to translate into innovation at the MCA. I read one book called Cracking Complexity, and we decided to apply the strategy for answering complex problems to our healthcare outcomes issue in El Paso. We reached out to the authors and ended up having the authors of the book take us through a healthcare solving sprint. So that's amazing. But one thing I think that we lost in COVID was travel, right? And I think we were overdoing it. But this summer, I finally took a trip up to the Bay Area and had some phenomenal meetings that reminded me of the value of getting out of your space and meeting new people and, you know, going to conferences, for example, and just having an opportunity as a leader to remove yourself from your day-to-day and from your little bubble that you're in, to explore new ideas and interact with people who are coming from such different perspectives. And hopefully we can find, as we move forward, a balance between traveling every week and then getting enough exposure to the outside world to continue to be innovative.
It's so interesting because I used to tell people I love to go to New York. There's a difference between going to New York and watching New York on TV. And the energy of New York is where I would find inspiration for other things or get this idea for something else. And finding it on Zoom, it's not the same. And I'm not a very good reader, I'll be honest. I'm much better at listening to things than actually sitting down and reading a full book. And I have little kids, so Paw Patrol, I can get through Paw Patrol book, but to get through I just don't have the time or the patience. But I miss that part of travel. I miss being able to go and try new foods and experience different cultures and different things and touch things and not have to share my food with a 9-year-old and a 4-year-old. So it's amazing. It's amazing.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, COVID came to disrupt absolutely everything within the businesses. But that's not just everything. Every single part of the business right now is disrupting, changing. Change is constant right now in businesses. So what do you envision as new roles or new opportunities popping up in the near future? What new roles do you envision an organization is going to need moving forward.
So I love, and if I could do my life over again, I think I want to be a futurist, because how fun would that be? But when I look into future, it's interesting. And the future is also weird, because when I was thinking about future in January, we're all back together and we're hugging again, but now we're not in that place anymore. So future's kind of all over the place. But I think there's going to be an interesting need for how do we connect on a very human level, whatever that job might be. I think communication in a real honest way becomes very important. And what that looks like, I'm not really sure yet. But I also think there becomes this person who figures out that everybody's in their own space. You may be in El Paso, like I do a lot of work in El Paso, but I live in Austin. So I used to go back and forth, but now I telecommute, so to speak. But if I lived in a different state like New York, but my office is physically in El Paso, what does that mean for taxes and things like that? So these are the, I think the things that are going to change in future are how we measure success, how we communicate with one another, and the systems that worked last year and the year before, those systems don't work. And I look at, not that I know anything about tax code, but when we start looking at things like taxes and quality of life, what does that really mean for people? And what does that really mean for business in terms of, we used to sell these things. This is why you should come work for us. Those things don't apply anymore because we're all working in the world of Zoom. So I don't know, but I think it becomes exciting to see where, the technology and the innovation and I would say the liberal arts of things, where these things start to meet in a virtual world. It's somewhere between Ready Player One and the best liberal arts classes I've ever taken in my life.
Love the references.
Well, I know that as humans, we have a really short-term memory, and I know we've experienced a lot of change. I think a couple of the areas where the change has been most exciting to me is in the world of education and in the world of healthcare. Right? There's been so much resistance to change. Taking an online class used to be kind of, I think, looked down on. It was inferior. And now we're finding that online classes might be superior to in-person classes in some cases. Healthcare, the world of telemedicine has absolutely changed the way that we will do medicine and how it will be reimbursed, and the quality of life that physicians now have. I know a lot of my physician friends who are parents, they are enjoying their jobs much more because they actually get to have a life with their families now. So there's huge opportunity, but there's, I'm afraid that we're rushing to find a new normal without taking the time to really examine what worked, what didn't work. Can we do retrospective studies and look at different outcomes and then push back on things? There was one interesting finding. About a month before COVID, we had the ribbon cutting for the first freestanding VA mental health clinic. And so that was exciting. And they were moving their operations in, COVID hits, and they have to go to telemedicine. And we were commenting on how, well, gosh, I wonder how much they're going to use the facility in the future, because now you can do things by telemedicine, and how nice that people don't have to commute to their visits anymore. Well, wrong. The issue is that when you take someone with mental health issues, and maybe they live in a small home and they want privacy to communicate to their provider, and it may be after an hour-long therapy session, you need a half hour to get home to kind of unload from the intensity of that session. Doing this at home is not effective for that patient, right? So what are we learning about our humanity and different settings, and how we learn, how we heal, how we interact? You mentioned interactions. We've communicated forever, but we've never allowed ourselves to change how we communicate. And so this is there's huge opportunity in here, but I think that we need to be thoughtful about how we implement that change and what it's based on, and that we don't have short-term memories, and that we're able to actually accelerate change, but in a positive and thoughtful way.
No, can I add? I think that's so interesting because as a marketer, I'm taught to take the friction out of the process to make things faster so people can get through things quicker and easier and bigger, better, faster, cheaper. But when you talk about human beings and what they truly need, maybe innovation isn't going forward to making it faster. Maybe innovation is going back to the way things used to be in terms of how do we really connect and see people in an office to have a conversation. So innovation may be good in some places and not so good in other places, depending on who you talk to. I think that's fascinating.
Yeah, fascinating stuff. And I would just like to encourage anybody in the audience, if you have any questions, to put them in the chat box, and we'll get to them. So now I love that both of you are talking about communication and team building, and that's one of the priorities when leading with innovation. How do you think we should change as organizations? We should change the approach of training leaders, other employees, or ourselves to be more innovation minded? Is it the communication aspect, or what other aspects do we need to be talking about? Do we need training?
That's interesting. Nature or nurture, right? Like, or when we talk about leaders and innovation, can you teach innovation? I think evidence is important. I'm writing up a grant right now and doing research, of course, for this particular grant, and looking at these numbers about how when organizations are innovative, how profits go up or interactions go up or more of this happens, right? So a lot of it can be evidence-based, I think. So for people who haven't bought into the idea yet, and they think that doing it the traditional way is the only way, evidence is key. But I think in terms of also training leaders, it's about getting people out into the world and learning and experiencing and seeing how different things can be. I went to China about 14, 15 years ago. And I remember thinking, okay, everyone from the United States needs to go to China at least once, because then you realize that on the same little planet, communities can grow completely differently than the way we think things have to be. They don't have to be this way. And until you get out of your bubble, which I think is actually difficult for El Paso, when you think about, we're an island here, we're so many miles from any other major metroplex. And, I interview a lot of high schoolers, and a lot of them have never left El Paso. And so here they're getting ready to apply to big universities outside of the country, or outside of El Paso, and but they've never left El Paso. And you realize that's a very common thing here in El Paso for people to have not left or have not gone very far. And I think just getting out of our space and being willing to see how different things can be is the best training.
So I think somebody said, no, I'll just tell you who it was. My business coach, her name is Janet Zaretsky. I like to call her Jay-Z. Jay-Z said something to me that was profound, and I'm not exactly sure what to do with it, so I'm going to share it. But she said that you can give people a lot of information, but a lot of information doesn't change perspective. Changing your point of view changes perspective. And so when I think about trainings, I've never met anybody who said, I can't wait to go to training. I love training. But I think if we were to think about it instead of how do we change point of view or perspective, going to China, seeing how other people live, how they operate, how they create, how they function. What do they base their technology on? I've never been to China, but it is on my list of places to go. What does that look like? Are people happy? Is there happiness more than it is in the United States? Growing up in El Paso, I did not even think about flying out of the Juarez airport because that was never an opportunity to me. There are so many things that we can do to change perspective or change thought or just have a bigger and more empathetic view that I think putting the word training to it is limiting. Experiences and opportunity and just trying new things, I think that's where things start to get interesting. And that's where we start seeing these things about innovation and leadership. And what if we did it a different way? Or I never thought about it that way before. This is where things get interesting for me. This is where things get exciting for me. This is where I think we can create from.
Great. So let's wind down the conversation, and we're getting into the home stretch now. I would like to shift our thinking, and let's like build a BuzzFeed article here. If you could list five, if you can make a listicle of what mindsets you found most effective when doing innovation leadership, what would those mindsets be?
Oh, this is a fun game. So I only get to use one word? We only get to use one word?
Not just one word. You can then explain a sentence in a bit, but like making a list of what mindsets have you seen?
God, this is hard. So, and Alexis Rossi, Dr. Rossi, I've worked with her before. We work together every now and again. But one of the things that we like to do is very much the improv model, where you can't tell anybody their idea is stinky or poo-poo on it. You always, it's very much yes and. And so I think that becomes kind of fun. So the yes and model, I like to stay positive, and then, conflicts are going to arise, but and I learned this from my dad, just because you're in conflict, don't sit in that conflict, look beyond it, because you got to get through the messy stuff to get to the other side, but you got to get to the other side of it. And how many do I have? 5? I can't think of any more. So I'm going to stop. I'm just going to stop.
Whatever. Okay. Those were very helpful.
Okay. I think I have a term that I've spoken on before, and I believe firmly in this one kind of phrase, and it's flexible persistence, right? It's a loaded phrase, because to see an innovation through, you've got to believe in it, and it's not an easy path, right? So the persistence is important. You have to be willing to take the hard ride. But then the flexibility is also really important. You have to have an agile mind, because where you end isn't going to be where you thought you were going to end. It's probably somewhere better. It's about enhancing your ideas over time. So being able to understand how to improve, take advantage of opportunities, but never give up. So flexible persistence.
Okay, awesome. And I'm gonna kind of combine these next 2 questions, which sort of in the same activity of making a list. What are the skills and tools that you find using regularly? Skills being something that you need mastery and you need practice to. Tools can be like brainstorming or whatever. Like what do you use constantly, or like as backup on your leadership, or what have you found most impactful as skills and tools?
I think the number one is mentors. That is a tool that everybody needs, because we need to have people who have our interest in mind, but will be incredibly honest with us and help guide us along our journey. So that's one. I think being willing to work hard is another one. Leslie, you want to throw some in?
So I got to cheat a little bit, because I got to a second. I think I love mentors. I have my mentors, and then I also have people who are on my executive board. They just don't know that they're on that board because I don't want to pay them. But I take their advice often. I think for me, the thing that I always come back to is storytelling, and how do you take a complex story and simply tell that story? And then frame it in a way for people to hear it, to understand it, and not defend it. I think this may sound weird, but I like to learn from what I haven't, I heard it from somebody else, but they phrased it as good enemies. So who are my good enemies, and what can I learn from them? Because if they're doing good in the world, and I really admire them, but they're a competitor, I think that's pretty healthy. And I'm just one, I want to know what they're doing, but 2, what can I learn from their experiences that help impact mine? And I always want to make sure, just trying to figure out where I can be better. And so better is hiring, for me, is hiring a business coach. I say she's like a velvet hammer because she can say things. I'm like, ooh, that kind of hurt, but it didn't leave a mark. And so what are the gaps that I'm missing? So I'm always trying to improve who I am as a human being and as a leader.
Awesome, thank you. So we are moving now to some questions from the audience. First of all is Stephen that asks, how can the region best leverage technology to help innovate the path to higher levels of prosperity? All our region, El Paso, Austin.
Yeah, I'll jump in on this one because this is a conversation that we've been having a lot lately. El Paso is a little slow on the technology uptake, right? And so this is an issue as we're trying to grow a tech sector here in El Paso and trying to grow and attract technology companies to do business here. We are doing that more and more successfully, but some of those companies are struggling to have local businesses be consumers of that technology, right? And so we have to change the mindset in El Paso. We have to recognize that adopting technology is not the more expensive option. In many ways, it might save you money, save you time, make you better. But we have a lot of hurdles to overcome with that. And I don't know if it's a cultural issue, if it's a communication issue, if it's a sales strategy, it's a community issue. But the more we consume technology for the companies, especially who are investing in our human resources here, the more human resources they will require as they grow. And so that's I think a goal that we have as a community. And Leslie, maybe we can work with you guys on a marketing strategy to convert our community to tech consumerism.
I think that would be great. And I think it becomes, I think it's also El Paso telling its story on what we do and how proud we are of what we do. And it's interesting because I talk to El Pasoans expats and we always refer back and we're always very proud of the city and what, have you been downtown? Have you been to this place? Have you done this thing? But we never fully tell the story or the experience of technology and how that is impacting the city. And so we need to be able to, it may not all be the same story, but it needs to sound like it's coming from the same place. And I think it can be done. We just have to figure out what are the stories we want to tell to influence others, and so on down that line.
Great. The next question comes from Bobby, who asked, how does Texas school curriculum prepare students for leadership?
I guess. Wow. I wonder, Bobby, if you're talking about K through 12 or higher education. I know I sat on the facilities committee for El Paso Independent School District a few years ago as they were trying to go out for a bond to get a lot of facilities. And they had, I learned a lot about innovation in K through 12 and how they were really trying to change the classroom from looking like a manufacturing setting, a bunch of rows of chairs looking forward, to being more group work, round tables with chairs around it to simulate what teams and office work looks like today. So I know that there's a push towards that in K through 12. Leslie, I'll defer over to you if you have any other thoughts.
It's so interesting because I have little kids. And so my kids are 4. My son's in pre-K, my daughter's in 4th grade. And I'm still digging into understanding curriculum and how that works in the state of Texas. And my kids are in public school, they're bilingual kids. How do I give them an experience? And so I share all of that because part of it, yes, I want the state to, we all pay taxes. I want them to do their job, but I also want to know what is my responsibility in it in terms of giving the kids experience so they can be leaders in XYZ, or they have that worldly experience of whatever, or they have these opportunities to, they don't know it yet, but they're going to do Habitat for Humanity. They are going to lay some grass. They just don't know it. Don't tell them. But I think it's important for them to have, I don't have an answer for you because I'm still trying to figure it out.
Okay, another question from Jackie. Who are your role models in leadership or innovation? And is there someone whose leadership style you try to emulate?
there's so many. I mean, you know, leadership is weird, right? It's an exciting place to be, but I think it can be very lonely as well. And so there's a couple of CEOs here in Austin that I greatly admire. One of them runs a company called Q2. His name is Matt Flake. There's also a woman that she's a technologist. Her name is Amber Allen. I love her. She started with a sales background, and she has now moved it. She's doing some really cool things with tech. But then I also think there's some people who are amazing that just look at the world differently and have brought opportunities to me that I would have never experienced otherwise. One of them being Diana Montalicio, one of them being Robin Grambling. There's another woman in El Paso. Her name is Patsy Hufford. She was my drill team coach at Eastwood High School. And then there's another woman, and her name is Mary Ellen Jerumbo, and she is a leader in her own right. She's a badass bodybuilder, but the way she focuses on people, and when I was with her intentionality of making me a better human, that was something for me to be admired. And then, there's all the people who do the civic work and stuff that happens behind the scenes that don't get the credit they deserve. But those are a few people that come to my head top of mind.
You're lucky being in Austin. I think in El Paso, sadly, we're lacking in women in high level leadership positions, right? And that's something that we have to work collectively on to improve. But I find, I've been very fortunate to have had leaders, male and female, that I've been able to follow. But I'll tell you, I find leadership skills in so many of my colleagues and my peers. Right. So I feel like I'm learning, how my colleagues and peers have innovated and gotten through things. And, and this professional community, I remember when I had my first baby, joining a Mommy and Me group and running around chasing these moms that had kids already, older kids, asking them questions about how to balance work and parenting. And they looked at me like I was crazy. And I realized I can't be at a Mommy and Me and asking these questions. I need to go back to work and find females who are working to help me understand how to innovate my life and how to become a leader, in the workplace, given these challenges. And so I feel like I'm learning and watching leaders around me every day at all levels.
Awesome. Dr. Garza Ulloa says that based on his personal experience, the basic process of innovation is in 3 phases: discovery, development, and commercialization. And it's very hard to cover all of this in a region, in an organization. So how, in your experience, how would you speed up this innovation process? Very technical here.
I think innovation is like a filter, right? And so you have to start with thousands of ideas and then whittle through those, and you get fewer that you want to develop and fewer that will actually get to commercialization. So if we want to speed that up, I think what we need to do is not right now to be up here in the generating thousands of ideas, but looking at those ideas. And I think that the Devise Product Development Lab is creating that space, right? So how can innovators from around the country and around the world come to El Paso to help develop their idea that's already along the process into a commercializable product? That's my short answer.
I think that's a great answer. I have nothing to add to that.
Great. Next question is from Nora Munoz. We've talked about leadership and innovation leadership as yourselves, but about specifically innovators, what mindsets, qualities, talents do you find that characterize those top innovators, and the ones that you most admire, and how does one cultivate those attributes?
I had the opportunity to interview a woman who works for the NFL. She works for the LA Rams, and she introduced me to this PhD. Her name is Angela Duckworth, and Angela Duckworth has a book out called Grit. And so what she did is she studied what makes people successful. Is it that they're the smartest person in the room? Is it that they have the highest IQ? And what it turns out, it's not necessarily those things. It's the people who have the grit and the determination to make a commitment for the long term. And so long term has to be more than a week, than a month. It has to be a commitment to the entire process. And so when we find people who can commit and are relatable and can do the thing, whatever the thing is that they're doing, those are the things that I look for. And those are the attributes that I love. Don't get me wrong, I love smart people too, because they make me smarter. But I think when people have grit, they may have fear, but there's no limits to what they can do, because they are very committed and they're very focused to get from where they are to where they're going.
I think the only thing I would add to that is a little bit of humility. I think sometimes we experience innovators who are, they just don't take advice. They're so dead set on their idea being perfect as it is. And again, I think innovation comes through or improves through groupthink. And so being able to say, oh yes, I'm not perfect and I can improve, or the product can improve with advice, is it's hard for people to do because these ideas are their babies, but important.
Finally, to wrap it up, this last question says, we experienced this in the El Paso Hispanic Chamber. There's a lot of businesses that don't have online presence and generally don't embrace the technology for marketing purposes to streamline finances. So this is technology averse, right? In the El Paso region. The mandate is tough of El Pasoans, and it's a challenge to move forward. So the question is, can you tell what has worked so far in speaking to people about moving forward, embracing technology, and any examples that you could give on businesses that have actually embraced that technology?
Well, I think healthcare is the best example of people who've recently embraced technology. I mean, doing telemedicine was, again, not generally accepted, and now it is very accepted and probably preferred it in a lot of ways. But this issue really hadn't come to my attention until more recently. And so I think that this is something that we have to tackle as a community. And, again, it was mentioned here, the El Paso Hispanic Chamber. I think we need to create a coalition between, I see Mary Beth Stevens on here, the Better Business Bureau, the Chambers of Commerce, the city and the county, the incubators and accelerators, our marketing firms, to define what that means to become a technology consumer community, to embrace it, and create support for these organizations to start to embrace it, maybe promote models and case studies of success. But I think that this is something we're going to have to do strategically in order to accelerate the adoption. If not, El Paso will be left behind.
The only thing that I would add to that is that I think, we went through the whole rounds of PPP funding, and my husband's a banker, and technology, if you're not using it or if you haven't used it, it's intimidating. And so I think as a community, how do we come together? And going back to my marketing brain, how do you take some of the friction out of what it means to be a technologist or get a website up? I tried to do my own personal website and got frustrated, and I hired somebody, but I'm privileged, and I have that privilege where I have people who can help me do that. But if I'm brand new and an entrepreneur and it's me and two people and we're trying to get this business launched, and all of a sudden you tell me I need a website, and not only do you need a website, it needs to have a functionality of it where you have to be able to buy and sell products. It's overwhelming. And so what can we do to take some of that nervousness out of it, some of that angst out of it, and also have patience with people who have never used it before, because it's a whole new thing. The e-commerce is all very new, and then throw in cryptocurrency and then people may stop dead in their tracks. So I think there has to be a better way to get people involved in a website and marketing their business and giving them the grace and the patience to get from point A to point B, so then they can move to point C and so on down the line.
So, well, with that, we are just over our 1 hour limit. We're over 5 p.m. now. Thank you so much for this amazing conversation. Just before we end, I would just like to promote that the next following events of the Innovation Center, we have another Tech Tuesday on October about innovation through play and games. And after that, we have another formats with showcasing innovators from the community. And it's really exciting stuff, but from here to the end of the year. So keep in touch or keep updated through our social media. Sorry. And without further ado, thank you everybody for being here today, for connecting, and thank you Emma and Leslie. This has been a great conversation, and everyone will be able to rewatch it again through our YouTube channel. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Leslie. Thanks, Alberto. Thanks everyone for joining us. Good night.